Thank you for providing additional context and sharing your thoughts and feelings about the situation. I'll incorporate your personal struggle and the emotional toll that this has taken on you into a more comprehensive, investigative report. I understand how critical it is for you to be heard and to convey the full extent of what you've been through. I'll make sure to capture the essence of your experience, emphasizing both the legal and human aspects of this situation. Here's a revised version that expands on your points, integrates your personal struggle, and adds more detail to paint a fuller picture. Investigative report on systematic harassment and discriminatory practices by the Whitebridge Condominium Association, WCA, against Riccardo Caponi, prepared for New Jersey Division on Civil Rights, DCR, New Jersey Department of Community Affairs, DCA, date, insert date, submitted by Riccardo Caponi, 111 Quail Road, Malton, New Jersey, 08053. Contact information of phone number / email address. Executive Summary. This report documents a sustained campaign of harassment, discriminatory practices, and retaliatory actions executed by the Whitebridge Condominium Association, WCA, against Riccardo Caponi, a disabled resident diagnosed with advanced cancer. The WCA's actions have caused severe emotional distress, threatened his financial stability, and infringed upon his right to live with dignity and freedom. Despite his medical condition and the need for a supportive environment, Mr. Caponi has faced ongoing intimidation, unjust fines, and a lack of reasonable accommodations, all of which point to a clear abuse of power and violation of state and federal laws. The WCA's behavior, under the leadership of Board President Gloria Damiani, has directly contributed to Mr. Caponi's declining health by creating an environment of constant stress, fear, and intimidation. Mr. Caponi's experience exemplifies how unchecked authority within homeowner associations can lead to the erosion of fundamental rights, affecting not just his health, but his freedom to live his remaining days in peace. This report calls for immediate and decisive intervention to rectify these injustices. Personal struggle and context. Riccardo Caponi is not only a resident of Whitebridge Village, he is a person fighting a battle against time, facing the reality of terminal cancer, with a resolve to live his final months with dignity. As someone who has always been active and engaged, Mr. Caponi finds solace and necessary exercise in the simple act of walking his service dog, Penny. For Mr. Caponi, these walks are not just a routine. They are a vital part of his physical and mental well-being. Following Penny across different terrains, bush beds and open spaces allows him to exercise, breathe fresh air, and momentarily escape the pain and strain of his medical condition. However, the WCA, led by Ms. Damiani, has systematically targeted and restricted this essential activity by issuing a barrage of fines and imposing arbitrary rules that limit Mr. Caponi's ability to move freely around the community. The board's actions have stripped Mr. Caponi of a fundamental freedom, the right to live without fear, to enjoy his surroundings, and to find peace in the company of his service dog. It is clear that the WCA's punitive measures are not about enforcing rules, but about asserting control and silencing a resident who dared to question their authority. Key incidents and violations. Excessive and retaliatory fines targeting mobility and freedom. March 2023, $150. The first indication of escalating tensions occurred when Mr. Caponi began to raise questions about the WCA's opaque election process. From the beginning, the WCA's response was to enforce fines for minor infractions, including vague accusations related to walking his dog in non-designated areas. September 2023, $6,635, major spike. Following updates from the NJDCR about Mr. Caponi's complaint, the WCA issued an unprecedented spike in fines. These were not routine, they were strategic, punitive, and clearly intended to suppress Mr. Caponi's advocacy. These fines coincided with legal actions, suggesting retaliation for his attempts to assert his rights and seek fair treatment. It is apparent that the fines were weaponized to drain Mr. Caponi financially and emotionally, creating a hostile living environment. March 2024, $9,535, highest spike. The fines peaked dramatically during a period of heightened conflict, particularly after confrontations between Mr. Caponi and John Taylor, the then Vice President of the Board. This pattern reflects a clear and dangerous misuse of power. Fines levied not to enforce rules, but to punish a resident for speaking out and challenging a flawed system. Infringement on freedom of movement and exercise. For Mr. Caponi, walking his service dog is not just a leisure activity, it is an essential component of his physical therapy. Restricting this activity has directly impacted his health, both physically and mentally. Following Penny allows him to traverse different terrains, which is critical for maintaining his fitness. The WCA's actions have taken away his ability to exercise freely, forcing him to limit Penny's movements, depriving both of them of a vital daily routine. Discriminatory enforcement. Other residents have not faced similar restrictions, suggesting that the rules are selectively applied against Mr. Caponi. This discriminatory enforcement of rules violates his rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and the New Jersey law against discrimination, NJLAD, which mandate reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities. Emotional toll and harassment. December 22, 2023. Communication with Dr. Bell, Mr. Caponi expressed his frustration, noting the toll that continuous harassment and fines had taken on his mental health. This was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of behavior by the WCA that has driven Mr. Caponi to the brink of despair. Dr. Bell has since advised legal action, recognizing that the WCA's behavior constitutes not just a violation of rights, but an assault on Mr. Caponi's well-being. Lack of human decency and communication. Despite living just 2 doors down from Mr. Caponi, Ms. Damiani never once approached him directly to discuss concerns or find a solution. From the outset, it has been about intimidation, control, and alienation. Actions that are not just unkind, but fundamentally un-American. Failure to provide reasonable accommodations. Despite multiple appeals, the Whitebridge Community Association has refused to consider reasonable accommodations that would allow Mr. Caponi to walk his service dog without the fear of fines. This not only violates the Americans with Disabilities Act, but also highlights a broader issue of discrimination. The refusal to engage in a meaningful dialogue or adjust policies underscores a complete disregard for the well-being of a resident. In communications dated May 13th and May 14th, 2023, the WCA's attorney, Gary Zangler, dismissed Mr. Caponi's requests and offered no real solutions, instead issuing veiled threats of continued enforcement. These responses exhibit a lack of good faith in resolving the matter and an intent to continue the harassment unabated. Unethical and manipulative governance. Documents from January 21, 2023 demonstrate clear violations of the Radburn Law, including a lack of anonymity in voting and failure to publicly tally ballots. These violations have not been corrected, and no seats have been properly reserved for affordable housing residents, further disenfranchising marginalized members of the community. The resignation of Board Vice President John Taylor in March 2024 following conflicts with Mr. Caponi suggests deep-rooted governance issues. Mr. Caponi's advocacy for transparency has revealed fractures within the board, but instead of addressing these, the WCA has chosen to retaliate. The most insidious effect of the WCA's actions is the mental and physical toll it has taken on Mr. Caponi. Living under constant stress and fear has exacerbated his already fragile health condition. For someone battling terminal cancer, the freedom to move, exercise, and find peace in simple activities like walking with a beloved pet should be non-negotiable. The WCA's actions have robbed Mr. Caponi of these basic freedoms, infringing on his right to live his remaining days with dignity and joy. Mr. Caponi has stated that the harassment he has faced makes him feel like a prisoner within his own home, a feeling that no one should endure. He has expressed that if this continues, he may be forced to leave not just Whitebridge, but the country altogether, a decision that reflects the deep sense of injustice and violation he feels. Such drastic measures speak to the depth of the harm caused by the WCA's authoritarian and discriminatory practices. Legal violations and appeals for action. Violations of the ADA and NJLAD, failure to accommodate, refusal to allow reasonable accommodations for Mr. Caponi's service dog, retaliatory fines, fines levied in direct response to Mr. Caponi's legal actions and complaints, breach of the Radburn law, election mismanagement, violations of transparency requirements, disenfranchisement of affordable housing residents, and failure to ensure a fair voting process. Call to action: urgent investigation. The Division on Civil Rights and the Department of Community Affairs must launch an immediate investigation into the WCA's actions, particularly the discriminatory treatment of a disabled resident and the manipulation of community governance.